Hello friends, and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. I'm in Derby this week, and today I've been working with a lovely, new, quite young bondage producer. And I do want to keep reminding people, and myself, that there are lots of really decent people in this industry. It's just that it's very interesting talking about the ones who are by no means decent. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about 10 job offers I've received in my career that were so crazy I recognised that I shouldn't do them before actually getting to the shoot. Quite often I don't manage to realise until too late, but on these occasions the individuals involved or the work involved were so deeply peculiar that I declined the jobs altogether. So let's get started. Number 1. This was right at the beginning of my career. I was such a new model that I hadn't realised yet that putting your phone number on your modelling profile online was a really bad idea. So quite a lot of these stories come from the fact that people could talk to me directly and therefore thought they could fool me more easily. I can only assume. I got a call very soon after I launched my modelling career online from someone who appeared to be American. I still remember his name. This is Michael Monteroso, honey, he used to say. And he phoned me up, purporting to be from one of the platforms that I was advertising on at the time, to ask how work was going for me, which I thought was lovely and very professional, and I told him it was going very well, and he said he'd love to put me in touch with his friend, who turned out to also be him, because they might be able to offer me more work. So then, 5 minutes later, I got a phone call from someone who was pretending not to be American and not to be called the same name, and he was offering me a very exciting job opportunity. So he wanted to meet me for an audition/interview, and he wanted to meet me at Heathrow Airport, Terminal 3, where he took me out for a drink and then wanted to see if I was comfortable walking round the airport in a short skirt. And he followed behind with a video camera to see what people's reactions were. Now, at the time, this was meant to be for a TV show, and this was my audition. And I felt a little suspicious because it seemed quite odd to involve the general public in an audition like that, but I'd got lots of short skirts, so I went along. Afterwards, he said I was great and that I probably got the job, but as is so often the case in these situations, he just needed to meet me one more time to check. So this time he wanted to meet in the West End and told me to wear a short skirt so that we could check that I was okay walking around in a short skirt. Now, I began to be suspicious, and I thought, I'm not going to audition again in exactly the same way, and I'm not going to expose more members of the public to potentially seeing me in a short skirt when maybe they don't want that. So I turned up to the audition/interview/drink without a short skirt on, and he was very disappointed. Whereupon he got quite drunk. I did not get drunk at all, and then tried to close the deal, because what he actually wanted me to do was to take a whole load of probably forged postal orders to the post office or the bank for him and to cash them in exchange for a percentage of the profits, and I declined, and that was the end of my relationship with Michael Monteroso, honey, or whatever the fuck he was. Wow. But I felt as though I'd sort of brushed up against the London underworld for the first time in my life, and I did not enjoy it. And the fact that he was clearly trying to prey on me as a new, young, poor model has always just reminded me that there are some hideous predators on the fringes of this industry. Because he wasn't a photographer, he wasn't even pretending to be a photographer, he was pretending to be somehow associated with a television producer, and I think the whole thing was a lie. It was one of the things that made me realise quite quickly that I needed to take my phone number down off my modelling portfolio. Number 2 was also a phone call right at the beginning of my career, probably in the first couple of months. And this man was very non-specific in what he was offering me to begin with. He said he could help me make sure that I closed the deal with more of the jobs I was offered. Now actually, when I was offered work, it pretty much always came off unless I turned the work down. So I remember him asking me, like, what percentage of the jobs that you're offered do you actually take? And I said, probably 70%. And he said, oh, well, I can help you get that higher. And I remember thinking, even as a new model, well, I don't want it higher, because the reason it's not higher is because I'm turning stuff down, not because they're turning me down. down. So he managed to keep me on the phone for 2.5 hours one Saturday evening. It was absolutely astonishing. And I was just wanting to get rid of him, and I was too polite at the time to put the phone down. I was too used to trying to please anyone who was offering me work because I'd been a professional actor, young professional actor in an industry where there is a huge oversupply. So I was very used to trying to please people. But this guy, I started to realise, I don't want to please you. You are beginning to really annoy me and you've not offered me any work yet. So eventually I said, I'm not going to continue this conversation until you tell me what this job you're offering me is. Whereupon he admitted that what he wanted is horrific. He wanted models to be on the front door of a swingers club to lure men in with the belief that they'd be able to have sex with us, whereas actually the only women available for sex were women who had come to the event of their own volition, probably with a partner. So it felt very much like a kind of trap, and I said no thank you and finally put the phone down after 2.5 hours, and it was ridiculous, and that was another nail in the coffin for my phone number being online. Now this was the first completely inappropriate actual photo shoot I was offered, and this was again probably in my first month of being a model, and this came through email. And I do think it takes a special sort of audacity to write this nonsense down. So this man had got an artistic project. It was going to end up in an exhibition, and it was going to involve multiple performers / models. And what he wanted was to focus on facial expressions of people experiencing orgasm. Now, I, at the time, was an art nude model. I wasn't even doing bikini glamour because I was very new and very nervous about what all of this meant. So there was no way I was going to be having an orgasm on set. The thing that makes this funny and ridiculous is that he assured me it was all going to be in the best possible taste because it wasn't going to be explicit. He didn't need me to be naked or any of the participants to be naked because he was going to hang up a sheet with a hole in it so that he'd only photograph my face. And now I have been haunted for almost 20 years since the beginning of my career by what that exhibition would have eventually looked like with all these pictures of people with having orgasm faces through this sort of jagged hole in a sheet that I imagined him cutting into a none too clean white sheet with nail scissors hung up on some sort of wonky light stands in a grubby studio somewhere, and it's a horrific idea. I can't believe anyone would be so desperate to see someone have an orgasm that they would go through this ridiculous charade of putting on an art exhibition about it. It was honestly quite ridiculous, and even embryonic model me knew to turn that job right down immediately, which I did. Now this job, honestly, I was really excited by it, and this was a little later in my modelling career. I'd probably been modelling 5 years at the time, and I got the opportunity to go to a casting for a movie. Now, I'd been a mainstream actress, so I'd been to auditions for movies before, but this was for a main role in a film with a proper budget, and it sounded quite exciting, not least because they were looking for actresses who were over 6 foot, and I'm 6'2", and jobs that require that sort of height come up very rarely. So I was very excited. I drove myself into central London, where the audition was taking place at a hotel. I'd been instructed to dress a particular way to suit the character. It was based on an animated character, and the producer was waiting for me in reception and was very complimentary about how I looked. Like, wow, you look absolutely perfect. I knew who you were immediately. You look just like the character. And he took me up to the hotel room for the audition. Now, I did get to read some lines, but the main part of the audition was he wanted me to hold him up against a wall as though I was strangling him. Now, it's not completely unheard of for the producer to stand in when you're auditioning and read lines with you. That is not a completely unknown thing to experience. I had auditioned with producers before, but I'd never been asked to actually touch a producer before, and I certainly hadn't ever been asked to do what is essentially stage fight with a producer who isn't trained in that before. Holding someone by the neck is not something you want to be just casually doing, and as it happened, I'd done enough stage fight training to know how to do it safely with appropriate force, but it didn't feel right doing it to someone who wasn't also a trained actor. Anyway, I did it, did my lines, and he said, well, that was great. The only thing was I need the strangulation to be a bit more realistic. And I realised, oh fuck, this may be a genuine audition, it may be, but this man also needs a pro dom and he wants to do breath play. And rather than paying someone honestly, he is getting hopeful young actresses to strangle him for free in a hotel room with the promise of a film role, and it's disgusting and it's predatory and it is pathetic. Surprise, surprise, I didn't get the role and the film never came out. I kept an eye out for a while and that project was not a real project, and I guess if I'd been cast in it I probably would have taken the job, but it was never a job in the first place. I sometimes wonder how many times he got fake strangled by a 6-foot+ woman that day. I wonder how many of us he found, and I wonder if any of us refused, and if any of you out there did refuse, then congratulations to you, because I was far too shy to know what to do. So I just strangled the bastard twice, not very effectively, and presumably not enough for him to reach the state of arousal he was looking for. So, wow. Oh god, this guy. He called himself a spy of photography. I'll always remember, hello, spy of photography. And he told me he was known as the architect of light. Now, friends, there is someone who is known as the architect of light, and that person was goddamn Michelangelo. Anyway, he phoned me up in the days when I still had my phone number online for stupid reasons of my own. I mean, he wanted to do a photo shoot with me. It was a 2-day photo shoot, and the interesting part about this photo shoot was that it wouldn't be paid until he published the images. Now, I queried this because I was a new model, but I was not foolish enough to think that being paid after the fact was a good idea in a job where it's traditional to be paid on the day. So when I asked why that would be, he said, it's to motivate you, because if I paid you on the day, then you wouldn't feel like you had to do a good job. But if you know that you'll only be paid if you do a good enough job to sell the images, then you'll be more motivated and you'll do better modelling. Now, obviously, I had very limited power to help sell the images, given that he was the architect of light. He was the one who was going to be going out and marketing them. So I declined the shoot, but Jesus, it makes me run a mile if I hear that sort of nonsense. And unfortunately, it's not particularly unusual, especially back then. But even now, I think probably photographers are trying that on with models, and it just doesn't wash, because I could have said, well, if you paid me on the day, you'd be more motivated to get your money back. By selling the bloody images, but I didn't. I just declined the shoot and remembered him forever. Wow. Oh god, this is a tiresome one. And this still, I meet this a lot. I think it's a little bit less prevalent now because of OnlyFans, etc. But once upon a time, photographers would quite often pose as a sort of broker between private collectors and models. These days, if anyone who's not a photographer wants pictures of you, they can just join your OnlyFans or order a custom video with you and get exactly what they want. But back then, sometimes I think probably people legitimately did go through photographers and say, can you get me nude pictures of Ariel Anderson and I'll pay for them. So I'm not saying that it was completely illegitimate, but I think quite a lot of photographers realised that this was a thing that they could use if they were basically too embarrassed to say what they actually wanted the model to do. They'd say, oh well, I've got this private collector and he'd like to see you handcuffed wearing a wristwatch, so can we do that? And it was, I think, a way to deny the fact that they were shooting exactly what they were into, but I also think it was probably a way to try to force models into shooting beyond the levels that they wanted to, because, oh well, it's not for publication, it's just for a private collector, and trying to make out that this imaginary collector was the perv rather than them probably made them feel more comfortable. So I had two experiences that particularly stood out with an imaginary private collector. The first time, it was a photographer I'd worked with before, and we'd done very light bondage. Then he got back in touch and said he wanted to do spanking. Now, he hadn't got any spanking stuff in his portfolio, so I said, no, I don't want to do spanking with you unless you'll hire a top for it to do the spanking. And he said, oh no, actually, you see, it's for a private collector, and the private collector specifically wants to see me. Like a private collector would care. As a heterosexual man, they would not care which other heterosexual man was ham-fistedly spanking me, but whatever. So, at the time, I was still relatively new, or just still a bit polite and naive, so I agreed to it on email because he said he'd done this multiple times with other models, but he couldn't show me the pictures because, well, they were for a private collector. So I said yes, and he wrote back and went, "Oh my God, I can't believe the first time I'm going to spank someone, it will be Ariel Anderson." And I said, "But you just said you've done this multiple times with other models." He got caught out in the lie, and I said I would not be working with him, and indeed I never did again. But what a wanker! God damn, he could have just said he was into spanking. And the thing is, you can book people to do spanking. You don't need a professional model for it. You can go to a pro submissive. I mean, she'll cost you more, but quite rightly so. And the other one was a guy, again, who I'd worked with before, who said he'd got a Japanese fan. So this was a bondage shoot where I was being tied up by the photographer. And then he said he'd got this Japanese fan who really wanted to see him tied up. And would I mind tying him up? He wasn't into it or anything, but this Japanese fan would pay, and it would pay for the whole day. And I was already in his house, and I felt guilty because I know I'm expensive. And I didn't know how to say no. Now, I wasn't a new model by this point, and I was a professional rigger, but I don't want to rig men, and I especially don't want to rig men when I'm alone with them and when it's their fetish, because that's basically the job of a pro dom, and I have turned down the opportunity to be a pro dom and earn more money multiple times because I'm not dominant and I don't want to do it. I don't want to provide a sexual experience for clients. It's just not something I'm comfortable with. But because it was for this fan, I didn't know how to say no, and so I tied up this sweating photographer in his spare bedroom and felt really dirty and tainted and uncomfortable because he'd made it very hard for me to say no, but I just never went back. And I don't think that Japanese collector slash fan existed. I think he wanted to be tied up by a model and he didn't have the balls to admit to it. And if he had, there's any number of professional doms who would have happily tied him up, and I found it really quite grotesque. So, dear sister models, if you haven't figured it out for yourself already, which hopefully you will have done, really steer clear of these people who act as though they're brokers for private collectors, because these days especially, those private collectors will be members of your OnlyFans, and quite rightly so, and I hope they're nice and I hope they're real. Wow! The Hermes scarf man. He contacted me about a photo shoot and he wanted to tie me up with silk scarves, which sounded absolutely fine with me. Quite specific, but perfectly fine. So I took the booking, and then, by chance, I was working with another model who started telling me this horror story about a guy she'd been working with. She was working in his house, he tied her up with silk scarves, and as soon as she was tied up, he'd started masturbating. And when she told me where the shoot was, I realised, okay, the chances of this being the same guy are very, very high. So I contacted him by DM and said, I just wanted to check with you. I'm just generally checking with everybody I'm about to work with for the first time that you're not expecting any kind of sexual interaction or experience, because although we'll be shooting fetish content, I don't provide a sexual service, and I wouldn't be, for example, comfortable with, well, let me think, people masturbating. And he wrote back, well, I don't think it's unreasonable, given that we'd be shooting my fetish, that I should be allowed to wank. And so I cancelled that shoot. And I'm so glad I did, because the model who told me the story had coped with it really well, but at the time I wouldn't have coped well at all. I'd have been absolutely terrified, and I'm just so glad that I didn't experience that, because if you want to masturbate in front of a woman, then the service provider you need is not a professional model, ever. And it was a very disturbing glimpse into what people sometimes think models should be comfortable with just because they shoot images that are intended to arouse. And I hope he didn't catch out too many more models. He's disappeared from the scene now, which I'm really glad about, but it was a horrible experience. But eventually another model, to her great credit, called the police on him, so hopefully that stopped him. Anyway, this man was an Italian fashion photographer and his work looked great, but he wanted to shoot sort of pin-up style lingerie with me, and he asked for a phone call to discuss it. Now, these days I would not accept a phone call about this sort of thing, but at the time I was quite excited by an Italian fashion photographer wanting to photograph me, so I agreed to a phone call. Now, on the phone call, he was very oddly insistent on asking me questions about how willing I'd be to take off my clothes, and I kept saying, well, I'm a professional nude model, I'm happy to work up to nude, that's no problem. And it only gradually dawned on me that he wanted me to pretend I was going to be really unwilling, freakishly. So he was saying things like, so if I asked you to take off your panties, would you, or would you tease me? I said, no, I'd take them off, that's fine, I'm happy to work with no panties on. He'd go, no, but if I asked you, would you do it immediately, or would you do it really slowly? And I was like, no, I'd take them off. I'd take them off immediately. How about your bra? If I asked you to take off your bra, would you show me your breasts, or would you turn around? And I I was like, no, I'd pose topless, that's fine. There's pictures of me topless in my portfolio. And I was too slow on the uptake, and I suddenly realised he was not only masturbating, but he was orgasming. And I put the phone down and spent the rest of the day feeling very, very grubby. It was horrible. And now I realise that if anyone starts to try to talk obsessively about the clothing or the act of modelling itself, like, oh, how would you take your clothes off? What sort of panties would you wear? I realise what they're doing, and they're just looking to dirty talk, and I shut that conversation down. But Jesus, that was not the most pleasant way to realise. I was offered a shoot in South Africa, and I was very excited because I'd only been there once and I hadn't modelled there before. And the photographer wanted to take me to a tiger sanctuary, which surprised me because I didn't expect there to be a tiger sanctuary in South Africa, and he wanted me to pose with tigers. Now, the first thing I thought was, oh wow, yeah, what an amazing job, I want to. Then I thought, actually, I wonder how safe that is. So I looked on YouTube at typed in tame tiger video, and found no tame tiger videos, but a whole load of tiger attack videos. So then I checked my travel insurance, and handling big cats is not covered by my travel insurance. So I wrote back to the photographer and said, look, I don't have insurance for this. Have you got insurance for this? And he said, oh, I'd not thought of that. So he went away and talked to his insurance broker and realised, yeah, you can't get insurance for that. So he realised it was too dangerous to do, and we didn't do it. So the real part of this story is when I told another photographer about the experience. I thought it was a funny story. I said, God, I got invited to do this job and I realised it would be really dangerous. And I told him about posing with tigers. And a few weeks later, he emailed me back and went, oh, I've actually found a model who wants to do that tiger modelling photo shoot. Can you pass on the photographer's details? And I said, no, I can't, because he's realised that it's too dangerous. So she shouldn't do it. So I definitely won't pass on the details. That shoot shouldn't happen. And he wrote back the most disturbing thing I've ever heard. He wrote back and went, oh no, she's not bothered. I was like, yes. She might not have her sanity fully intact, but I do, and it's not safe. I'm not going to broker this deal. She's not going to go and model with tigers on my watch. And he said, oh no, she's not worried about safety. I just had her hanging off a tree on the edge of a cliff, and if she'd slipped, she'd have died. And I just... my tolerance for this absolute twattery is very low now. What were you thinking taking that picture? What was she doing? Hanging off a tree on the edge of a cliff at your photo shoot? What the hell? A model who doesn't know enough to look after her own safety is not a good model. If you meet one of those models, you should teach them to be more careful. You shouldn't just think, oh good, she doesn't care, I'll just put her in more danger. And finally, satisfy me in Chichester. I got an email from the photographer, and it was quite recent. I'm going to read it to you. Greetings, dear Ariel. I'm seeking a sub-slave for hire to photograph and film, satisfying me and my friends. Would you be interested to negotiate a contract? This sounded suspicious to me. What does satisfy mean? Satisfy, well, I thought I knew what it meant, but I thought I'd ask because I was interested. I said, thanks for making contact. Could you perhaps give me more detail about what the shoot involved, please? I'm looking for a sub who can come over to my house by the sea in Chichester once a week to be photographed and filmed, submitting to mine and my friends' desires. This would mean full sex, bound and in dress, and looking after me and male models and men and couples we find together. I will direct and capture the image and footage, and we can use it on each other's subscription feeds. I said, thank you. But I think you'd need a porn model who actually shoots sex for that, or maybe an escort. If you're not publishing the work and the other participants aren't professional models, it's not my area of expertise. I'm a BDSM model, but I do not shoot sex. And it occurs to me that if you're a porn model, you probably wouldn't want to shoot porn with a whole load of random men who hadn't been STD tested. And if you're an escort, you're probably not going to want to be filmed. But one person who certainly is not going to want to do that job is a bondage model who doesn't shoot hardcore sex. It was a very puzzling thing, but the thing that stuck in my head is the idea of this bungalow in Chichester where all these goings-on would happen. And I don't mean to kink shame, but there is something about that image that's just stuck with me. So now when I drive by the sea and I see bungalows, I wonder if in there is some sort of unregistered orgy with some slave sub satisfying a random man and his friends. So those were 10 jobs that I turned down, and I think I probably should have done. Yes, please, 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 if you've got your own mad experiences of photo shoots that either that you did turn down or that you should have turned down, let me know. Thanks as always for watching. I am Ariel Anderson, these are my Twilight years, and I wonder if you'd like to come and satisfy me and my friends in mid Wales.